Okay, let's get this started. So we are now up to. I can't see my Gemara. I have to get the screen out of the way. Okay, up to that. We are now up to the next shaila. Omar Papa. Pshita Li. It's pasha to me. I think I might have some interference. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. Back to the share screen. Okay. Revolting. Omar Papa. Pshita Li. Maloi Kumtzai. When the Torah is talking about the carbon mincha, and the Torah tells you that you have to take a koimitz, it's kidekamsa inchi. The normal way that you make a komitza, which is the kohen holds his hands like this, vertical, his pinky is facing down, and he scoops into the flour, and then he closes his fingers to grab the flour or mixture that he's taking. However, what happens if it's kamatz b'roshay etzba'isov? He was komitz b'roshay etzba'isov. What that means, Rashi says, is that you held your hand face down over the flour and then you scooped it up this way. Would that be a kosher kmitza? Milamata l'mayla. Would that be a kosher kmitza? Which means you go in this way, you put your hands in this way, you scoop down, and then you lift up. Would that be a kosher kmitza? Mao. And minatztadin mao. Rashi's minatztadin is you put your hands with your palm up, and you push down into the flour, which will force the flour to come up in between your fingers, and that's how you made the kmitza. Would the kmitza in all these different variations be a kosher kmitza? So the Gemara Teiku, we don't know. Amar Papa. Now we discuss the same shaila by the chafina when they're scooping up the ketayos. Pshitli maloi chafnov kedechafni inchi, which you basically take two hands, you dig into the flour and you lift up. Boy Papa, what about chafan b'roshes b'isov? What if you went from above and dug down? Or what about milamata l'mayla? You put your hands in and you scooped up, and ma'u minatzat ma'u. You pushed your hands down and you got it. And there's one more shaila that's asked by chafinas. We know a chafina is two handfuls. What if it's chafin bezu ubezu? You took two independent handfuls, and then the karvan zu eitzosu, and then you brought them close to each other. Ma, what would be the halacha? In all these cases, the Gemara says take. So Tosfos asked the obvious kasha: why would we think that the halacha would be any different by the chafina as it would by the kmitza? They're really the same shaila. So why is there a need to repeat it? So Tosfos asked this kasha over here. Frank Tosfos, ein lahakshus, don't ask. Since we already asked these exact same questions by kmitza, my hodder sumi boile b'chafina. Why would we ask the same questions by chafina? Hainuhach. It's exactly the same like we asked earlier. Wherever you have a parallel issue between the kmitza and the chafina, the Gemara always asks, why are you asking the shaila by chafina? It's the same thing. Yesh loimer zok Tosfos, the pshita that gufa chafina v'kamitza einem shavel adoni. The act of kamitza and the act of chafina are actually two different acts. They're completely two different activities. The high kedekamsi inchi, kedechafni inchi. The kamitza is done the normal way of a kamitza, and the chafina is done the normal way of a chafina, which is it's not taken with your fingers. It's just scooping up a landful. So since they're two separate things, and that's why the Gemara thought that there was a good reason to investigate chafina separately. Even if you would hold it is derech kmitza in all these individual type of cases, or even if you would hold that it doesn't fit into the description of kmitza, maybe this still would classify as a chafina. Zok the Gemara weiter. Boy Rav Papa. Rav Papa has another shaila. Dovke lekoimetz b'doifnei damona. Normally, when you do a kmitza, you have the mixture of the mincha and the keli. You make the kmitza, and then you put the kmitza into a second keli, which is a klisharis, which will be mekadesh the kmitza. But instead of putting it on the floor of the keli, you stuck it to the side wall of the keli. What's the halacha? Toich kli be'inan is the requirement that it should be in the keli, within the keli va'ika. It's technically in the airspace contained within the walls of the keli. Or adilma hanacha b'soichai ketiknai be'inan. It's got to be placed down in it, and this isn't placed down in it, and therefore it wouldn't qualify as a proper kmitza. Teiku, Zok Gemara. We don't have an answer to that. We'll ask another shaila. Boy mar baravashi. What if afche lemana? If you have a becher that has a built-in stand, so if you turn it over, there's a clay kibble, there's a receptacle inside the stand as well. So what if you turn the keli upside down, and there was a type of keli that had a stand, v'dofke lekomitz bar isei, and you put the kmitza on the bottom of it, the bar isei demana on the bottom of the keli. What would halacha be? Hanacha b'soiche be'ina. Does hanacha have to be within the keli itself? It's technically in the keli, but it's not in its way. It's in the keli in the proper way. There's more Teiku. So the Achronim stole this suit to a different shaila. In the olden days, when people had a suit and they wore out, all they would do is they would turn it inside out and work on the other side. So there's a shaila: are you allowed to turn your suit inside out and wear it during the 3 weeks? Or do you have to take a shechianu on? It's a new beged. Or is it the same beged? So there are those who want to say it's totally in this shaila. If you all turning it over is the same keli, well then, huadin, if you turn over your beged, it's the same keli and you should be allowed to wear it. You should be able to allow to put it on for 3 weeks. It's not a new beged. But if you hold it like a separate entity, well then maybe then, if someone wanted to reverse his clothing so that the shiny side should be on the inside, then you would not allow to do that during the 3 weeks. Dr. Gemara Viter, Boyra Papa, Maloi Chatnav Sha'omer. When we're talking about your 2 handfuls, is it mechukais? Is it exactly level, or gedushas, or is it heaping? Omer Rababel or Ravashi Tashma. Maloi Chatnav Sha'omer loy mechukais. It's not flat. Maloi gedushas is not heaping. El tfufos. Tfufos, Rashi explains, when you fill up your becher with wine or grape juice, you overfill the rim, but the surface tension holds it in so it doesn't spill over. Tfufos is that, a little bit extra, a little bit over, but not heaping. And that's how you did the Malach Hafel.
This has to be something that's difficult to do, because we said in the last stuff that it's one of the difficult avodas. I'm happy that you brought
that up. I'm happy because that's going to be very relevant today. There's a shaila that we learned when we discussed the first daf when we were discussing whether or not you can use a keli to do the chafina and not have to use your hands at all. Right? There was a shaila: could you make a custom keli? Because by the mincha, I think we learned that you could make a custom keli. The question was, by the mincha we said you could not make a custom keli. The question was, by the chafina, could you make a custom keli to do the chafina? And the Gemara wanted to bring a raya from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said, after the Mishnah talks about the chafina, he says the kach hoisamidasa, and those words didn't mean anything. So the Gemara thought to suggest maybe the kach hoisamidasa is to tell you that you're allowed to make a special keli for the chafina. And the Gemara says you don't have a raya, because maybe what this is telling you is that once you get in to the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and you're there with your spoon full of kataris, you have to make a second chafina. That's what the Gemara said. The difficult chafina, when we learned earlier in the Gemara that chafina is difficult, Rashi says that's referring to the second chafina that you would make inside the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim. But the first chafina, just scooping it out, that was not so difficult. And the Gemara will discuss precisely how that difficult chafina worked. And after we learn the Gemara, it will be very easy for us to coach any kohen to do it, but it's much easier said than done. So we'll see the Gemara soon. So it's great for bringing that up. It's not awesome.
The kmitza that we said yesterday, the only reason why it was difficult is because sometimes it's hard kmitza.
Because if it's not just flour, if it's chunks, it takes a lot of effort with your pinky and your thumb to break off the extras.
But if it's just flour, it should be easy.
That's right. And that's what the Gemara said. The only difficult kmitzas are those from a minchas machvas and the minchas marcheshes, which were baked or fried before, and because of that, they're chunks. If it's flour, yeah, it's very easy to separate away what's sticking out from the fingers. So that's what nan hasam. Nishbach adam ala ritzvah. We know the halacha is after a carbon is shechted, there's a kohen supposed to be standing there with a keli to be makabel all of the dam. Well, what if he was a shlamazel and the dam fell on the floor? But he figured he'll scoop it up. Also, he scooped it up. Can you use that for his rika? Zoktimar apostle, that will be puzzle. That's not that the blood becomes disqualified. However, minakli ala rispa, what if he successfully captured all the blood and then he's v'shlamazel, then he dropped the keli and he spilled it all out. But he gathered it up again. That will be kosher. We know how do you know this? The Tanya Rabbanon. It says v'lokach midam hapar. You should take from the dam hapar. So the Gemara teaches us this means midam hanefesh v'lo midam ha'or. You have to get the blood that shoots out with force, that the neshama leaves the animal with, from the arteries in the neck that shoot out. V'lo midam ha'or, not blood from the cut. So like when you cut yourself, blood comes out. That's not the type of blood we're looking for. And after the blood spurts out forcefully from the arteries in the neck, then it just starts to run out slowly. That wouldn't qualify either. It has to be the dam that's squirting out.
So what does that have to do with if the squirted out blood fell on the floor?
That's the next step. Midam hapar. We also dash in midam hapar. You're going to love this drasha, David. You're going to love this. Midam hapar. Take the mem away from the word midam and put the mem over the next word, but a h, but a hey. Dam mehapar yikablenu. You have to be mekabel the dam directly from the par, not that it should go on the floor first. So, Frank the Gemara, why would you do such a thing? Take the mem from here and put it there. Why don't you just read it the way it says, midam apar, and say it means midam apar? You don't have to catch all the blood. You have to catch some of the blood. Zok the Gemara, you wouldn't be able to learn that pshat. That cannot be pshat, and that's why we're forced to renovate and move that mem away. Tisol gedadach midam apar means midam va'afilu mixas dam. If the pasuk means literally what it's saying, that you don't have to capture all the blood, just some of the blood, that's not true. Because the Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mekabel tzarich shekabel es kol domei shel par. The Mekabel has to capture all of the blood. Shenemer ves kol dam hapar yishblach al yishadam mizbeach. So since we have to modify the word, we'll say al shema mina my midam hapar. It's dam mei hapar, dam directly from the par. Yikablenu should be mekabel. Now, in order to be able to willy-nilly move letters around, you have to have a license to do so. The Kasover in this Tana holds goyrin umaysifin v'darshin. You're allowed to take a letter from one word, add it to another word, and then make a drush out of it. Don't try this at home.
Right.
Boy Papa.
I would be happy with the 5-second rule. You know?
It works if you first captured it in the keli and then spilled out. If you're going to be a shlemazel, you have to be a galungan shlemazel. You should only drop it after. And this is the Kahanim who are reason already. Zok to Gemara. Boy Rapapa. Rapapa had a shayla. Just like by the blood, what if something similar happened with the Ketoris? Nispazer HaKetoris Mimaloy Chafnat. The Kohen Gadol made his chafina, and then he dropped it, and he spilled it on the floor. Mahu. Do you say Yadoi Ketzaber Behema Domi? Are his hands like the neck of the behema? And that means it was never in a klishares. And therefore, when it falls to the floor, psula. Maybe his hands act as a klishares. And therefore, even if he dropped it on the floor, afterwards, psula, it'll be possible. So that those who say if he dropped it, then he's a behind. So how did he drop it? But nevertheless, the shaila is if his hands have the end of a klishares, because he's scooping it out with his hands, maybe that's enough to say that the Keteris is qualified. Even if he drops it later, they could capture it back up. Once again, the Gemara says Teiku. Boy Papa. One more question.
Very nice, Baruch Hashem.
V'chishev b'chefinis Keteris mahu. What if during the chafina, while the kohen did his chafina, he had in mind not to be makir the ketores today, rather I'm going to be makir the ketores tomorrow. Which, if you were shechting an animal and you had kavana to spritz the blood tomorrow, that would be pigel. So does the machshava of pigel work by the chafinas haktaris? Mi amrina, would you say yalef meloi mimincha, where we learn meloi chafnov from the meloi that it says by the mincha, and therefore just like mahosam mahanya by machshava, just like by the kmitza, if when the kohen makes the kmitza, he has in mind to be makdir tomorrow, that's pigel. Hachanami mahanya be machshava, so the chafina should have that same status, or maybe not. So Rashi asks a Bamba de Kakasha. This is the same shaila we've been repeating over and over again. Do you have the limud of maloi from chafina, from kmitza to chafina? So why is this a new question? It's once again hainuhach. It's the same question. So let's see how Rashi deals with it. So Rashi is v'achanami mahanya machshava b'chafinasa oiloi. In fact, Rashi or Zok Rashi v'achalek shuya hainuhach k'da actual ill. You can ask hainuhach like all the other questions we had when we were comparing chafina to kmitza. The hanu tarvayu boi havalu b'cha taiba. The questions that we had earlier about if you're allowed to use a spoon, and the questions were in the structure of the chafina and how they're done, or depending on how you put your fingers into the flour, like we had earlier. All those questions are all in the structure of how the process of the chafina goes versus how the process of the kmitza goes. But now we're discussing pigel. It has nothing to do with the process. It's a completely side issue. Does the Isra of pigel apply to it? And therefore, if you wouldn't learn Gzer Shava between Kaimetz and Chafina Lagabe Bekumtzai to explain how the Kaimetz is done, nevertheless, maybe you would dash the Gzer Shava to teach you that there's a Machshava pigel with possible. That's why this is an independent child. And once again, the Gemara says, so the Gemara brings a raya. Zok to Gemara. Amar le Rab Simi bar Ashi le Rav Papa. Rab Simi bar Ashi responded to Rav Papa's shaila with a raya. Tashma. The Mishnah tells us in Chagiga that there were 11 takanos regarding kachim, to give kachim a higher level of chumrah and of kedusha that the chachamim made. And Hoyshev Rabbi Kiva added an additional chumrah to the list, and the chumrah that he added was hasoiles, v'haketoyres, v'halavoina, v'hagecholim. If you have soiles, you have ketoyres, which is relevant to us. Lavoina, gecholim are coals, are also relevant to us. Shim nagad fil yoyim miktos and pasal eskula. Now, normally, if you have a keli and you have a whole bunch of ketoyres inside it, if a sheret touched one side, that side becomes tameh. It doesn't make the other side tameh because they're all individual pieces, and the tumah wouldn't go through the whole thing. But there's a mila by kachim that if they're in a keli, the keli makes them as one unit, and therefore, if a sheret's even touched one side of these pieces, the entire contents of the bowl would be possible. So, from this chiddush, that the entire contents of the bowl are possible, it means that they're considered in the klisharis. Kasol kadaitach. Let's make a stretch and say, be the puzzle full yoim, since we say that they're considered contained in the keli which combines them, legabe, a tumas full yoim, passing them. So I was wrong. It's not a sheretz we're talking about. It's actually a much lighter level of tumah that we're talking about, which spread throughout everything. But with the puzzle full yoim, pastel lamin lina. It's in if it's in the keli and it was mekudesh with the chlisharis, and because of that it has a mile of kedusha that it's full yoim will passel at all. Well, then so too, if you left it overnight, it should be possible with lina, because when something's in the klisharis and it acquires a kedusha saguf, it's possible lina. And now we're going to make another stretch. Umidalina pasla, and if it's puzzle with lina, then pasla nami machshava. If we say this is in the klisharis, and the klisharis is mekadosh for tuma, and it's mekadosh for lina, it should also be mekadosh so that if you had a machshava of pigel, it will pass it. Correct Rashi, the Gemara this used a brisa that you have to make a lot of assumptions. You have to say that Tvul Yoim would apply to Lina, and Lina would apply to Machshava. There was a much better brisa that the Gemara could have brought a raya from that's more direct. Zok Rashi, I mean, Bekashali, the Shavke Lamasnis in the Meila, our Gemara ignored a Mishnah in Meila that's so much more direct. That Namba Behedya, it's a Geferish in the Mishnah in Meila, HaKoimetz, Vakatoiris, which is what we're talking about, Uminchas Koyanim, Ma'alun Behen Mishahuktashu, once they're Kodesh Bechlisharis, you're moil on them, and Kitchu Bechli, I'm sorry, when you designate them as Hektish, you could already be moil. Kitchu Bechli, but once they're in a Keli already, it goes to a higher level of Kedusha, it becomes Kedusha Zaguf, Huchshurli Pasul B'Tvul Yoin, Ubemechusik Kaparim, Ubelina. So it says Beferish Lina. In our Gemara, we have to stretch. If it's Tamei B'Tvul Yoin, it'll also be possible Lina. But here you have a Mishnah that says it black and white. The Gemara had to make a stretch because with the possible Tvul Yoin, possible Aminida. So bring a brisa that speaks specifically about Lina. So Tosfos says that this brisa might be speaking about a regular Ketairis, which is more dependent on its Keli, on its daily Ketairis, which is dependent on its Keli. That's why it would be combined. This might be talking about the Ketairis of Yom Kippur, which only go in the hand or in a calf, and it could be the Gemara felt that this would be a better ride. Boy Rapapa. Rapapa had another shayla. So you could see we have a whole lot of shaylas today, of which none of them are getting answered. But Boy Rapapa, very short daf. Chishev b'chatias k'cholamah. Now we know that the actual avoida is the chafina of the Ketairis as a preparation to do the Haktaris, they had to dig gecholim off the Mizbeach. But that's not the carbon, that's just the fire to burn the carbon off. So the question is, would that also become pasul als pigel? Mahu. Machshir mitzvah ke mitzvah dami? Do you say this is it's not the actual mitzvah, it's just a machshir of the mitzvah, it's part of the preparation for the mitzvah. Does that have a din of a mitzvah and it'll also be pasul with pigel? Or not, Teiku. So the question is, what is the shayla? What do we want to say is possible? Is the whole Ketairis possible? Are the Gecholim possible? So Rashi discusses it. It's like you had a machshava of pigel about avoid itself, and therefore the entire Ketairis will be possible. Lashon acher, however, Rashi offers another pshat. That is chishav b'chasiyas gecholim ma'u sheyivselu gecholim b'machshava zug milahakir lein. Not that the whole thing will be possible. Merely these gecholim will no longer be acceptable. You'll need more gecholim, but your Ketairis will still be good. Rashi adds, Lina shma'in the possible. We know that if the gecholim remain overnight in the keli, they become possible. We just learned that on the brisa at the bottom of Amar Aleph. One of the items on the list that Lina apostles we said are gecholim. Lina shmina apostle with the apostle Tvul Yoin keditnan l'el, like we just learned. Miu hami boyalon. Nevertheless, the Gemara has a shayla by machshavas pigel. Yava chasiyasan avoida lemisel bo machshava. Will it be considered an avoida that the mere machshava of doing it the wrong day will possible? Do you say machshir mitzvah kamitzah damu, and therefore v'cheheche the machshavas chafina possible b'ketayres machshavas chatia nami possible b'gecholim? The same way a bad machshava by the chafina will possible b'ketayres, a bad machshava by the chatia will possible b'gecholim, or not. And once again, the Gemara says Teiku. Boy, we name Reb Sheshes. Normally, after the Kabbalah Stam, someone has to take the container with blood to the Mizbeach, where a kohen has to make zrika. So, is this halacha allowed to be done with the left hand? Why yes, and why not? Zok Rashi, halacha b'smoil mayu. Halacha sadam mi boile. The shayla is by halacha. Kabbalah uzrika, by Kabbalah and by Zrika, Tichsiv Behu Kahuna, it says beferish in the pasuk that Kabbalah and Zrika must be done by a kohen. Pshitalon, that we know for sure, the left hand would be possible. Why is that? Because there's a rule in Kachim, the Chol Mokim Mishenemar Etzba Ukahuna, whenever the Torah mentions that the kohen has to use his finger, so it mentions a kohen and it mentions a finger, we automatically know that that means Eina El Yamin. That automatically means the right. Now, it says by Kabbalah and it says by Zrika, kohen and etzba. Aval Halacha looks at Behedya. The Torah never mentions explicitly the avodah of Halacha. How do we know b'chalal that there's something called Halacha? Since when the Torah expresses the avodah of Kabbalah, the Torah uses an unusual word for Kabbalah. And the Torah uses the word halacha, the Tanya ve'krivui, you should bring it to the Mizbeach, zu Kabbalah's dam, that's referring to the Kabbalah, so it uses the word ve'krivui, bringing it to the Mizbeach to describe the Kabbalah. So from there we know, that's how we know it's an avodah, and that's how we know there's something called halacha. But the Torah never directly discusses halacha, and therefore the Torah never mentions the word kahuna beferish and the word etzba beferish. So even though we know it's an avodah because the Torah expressed Kabbalah in an unusual fashion, maybe using the left hand won't passel this particular avodah, because it doesn't say kahuna beferish by the halacha, by the Torah when it discusses halacha. Gemara, we have a Pashat Raya from our Mishnah. Tinitua, we have our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, not he's making the halacha of the Ketores, which should be no different than the halacha of the dam. They're both not mentioned beferish in the Torah, but they're both actual integral parts because you got to get it to where it's got to go. In the case of the dam, you got to get it to the mizbech. In the case of the Torah, you have to get it into the kodesh HaKodeshim. Yet the kaf you hold in your left hand. So you see clearly that there's no problem with doing halacha with your left hand. Frag the Gemara, what are you talking about? Why would you bring a raya from our Mishnah? We have a much more meferish raya. We learned when the Kohanim lined up to carry a varan from the butchering area to the ramp, the first thing that was dispensed was the head and the rear right leg, the hind right leg. So the Mishnah tells us that the head the Kohen held in his right hand, and the regal shel yamin b'smoil, on the leg he held in his left hand. Ubeis oira lechutz, and the part where it's cut is against his body, and the foot sticks out, so you don't have the exposed wound. So there you see clear that you could do the halacha of the varim to the mizbeach with your left hand. So it's not a raya from there because imay hasum havamina hanamili halacha tlei machva kabara, carrying limbs to the mizbeach. What if the limbs were not put on the mizbeach at all? The carbon is kosher anyway once the zrika is done. So the halacha of a varim to the mizbeach, which putting them on the mizbeach themselves aren't machva the kapara, it's not so integral. There, maybe you could do with your left hand. But the halacha of the dam to the mizbeach, which you need for kapara, or halacha of the ketayos to the kodesh HaKadoshim, which you need for the kapara, loy, there maybe you wouldn't know that a left hand is okay. Kamash Malon, we learn from the ketayos that the left hand is acceptable. Lest you think that the Gemara blind that the left hand is acceptable, we might as well just learn a couple more lines which refutes it right away and says that it's possible. May say fair to Gemara. The Allah is Zor Yisrael, the Einin, or an Einin who lost loved one that day, Shikir, someone who's feeling really good, Ubal Mum, and someone who has a mum, Bikabala, Uvehoilocha, Uvezrika puzzle. They're puzzled for all of these three avoidance. V'chein Yoshe v'chein Smoil, puzzle. You're using your left hand to do halacha is possible. So it's black and white that Reb Sheshesh's argument that the left hand is kosher is wrong. Clearly, for halacha, if the left hand is used, it's going to be possible. And I guess we can pick up tomorrow with Daf Memtes. And on Daf Memtes and Beis, the Gemara is going to discuss in detail what the difficulty of the Chafina was, and Tosfos is going to explain the difficulty of the Kemitza and the difficulty of the third avodah. I forgot what the third avodah was. Chafina, Kemitza, and Malika. The Gemara, Tosfos will explain exactly what those difficulties were. So we'll see tomorrow. Shkoyach, everybody.
Have a good night.
Have a good